Michael I. Neiman is Professor Emeritus of Journalism and Media Studies at SUNY Buffalo State, where he taught from 2002 and received the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching. Trained in American Studies, his research centers on ethnographic and qualitative examinations of alternative and non-hierarchical communities, most prominently the Rainbow family, which he analyzes as temporary autonomous zones engaged in consensus decision-making, cultural identity construction, and negotiations with state authorities. His book People of the Rainbow, A Nomadic Utopia is a key contribution to this field. Alongside his academic work, Neiman has been an award-winning syndicated journalist, writing on propaganda, consumer culture, and grassroots social movements. This 2011 paper, The Shanti Sena Peace Center and the Non-Policing of an Anarchist Temporary Autonomous Zone, Rainbow Family Peacekeeping Strategies, explains how the Rainbow family, a large non-violent community that holds week-long gatherings in remote forests, keeps the peace without using police. Instead of relying on force, they use friendly approaches like listening, chanting together, forming calming circles, and encouraging people to follow shared values. Their peacekeepers, called Shanti Sena, are just regular participants who step in when needed, which works well because everyone feels part of the same community. The paper shows that these non-violent methods often diffuse conflicts more effectively than traditional policing, and it contrasts this with cases where government officers entered the gatherings and escalated situations through fear and force. Overall, it argues that peaceful, community-based conflict resolution can work even in large, diverse groups when people share responsibility and trust. The introduction explains that the paper's main goal is to understand how the Rainbow family keeps large gatherings peaceful without using any kind of traditional police force. Instead of relying on authority, weapons, or force, they use non-violent methods such as talking, listening, and group-based problem-solving. The study focuses on how these peaceful strategies work in real situations where thousands of people come together in remote areas. To explore this, the author uses two main sources of information: first-hand observation and government records. The first-hand observation comes from spending time inside the gatherings and watching how conflicts unfold and how people respond. The government documents include official reports and materials that describe how law enforcement views and interacts with the Rainbow family. By combining these sources, the author builds a clearer picture of how the group's peacekeeping system works. The introduction also lays out the paper's argument, which is that the Rainbow family's peaceful methods often work better than normal policing when it comes to calming tense situations and preventing violence. The author suggests that traditional police, when they appear at these events, sometimes make conflicts worse rather than better. The introduction sets the stage for a direct comparison between the Rainbow family's approach to maintaining order and the more force-oriented approach taken by law enforcement. The background section explains that the Rainbow family began in 1972 as a wandering, leaderless community built around ideals of peace, equality, and simple living. Rather than forming a fixed organization, they grew into a loose network of people who gather in force each year to practice a way of life that rejects hierarchy and emphasizes cooperation. Their goal is to show that it is possible to live together peacefully and sustainably, even in large groups, without relying on formal structures of authority. These gatherings function as what scholars call temporary autonomous zones, meaning short-lived spaces where people step outside everyday society and create their own rules based on shared values. During these events, the group aims to create a kind of liberated time where decisions are made through open, public discussions in which anyone can participate. This consensus-based process replaces formal leadership and allows the community to act collectively without a central governing body. A major part of the Rainbow family's identity is a deep, long-term commitment to nonviolence. They do not just avoid violence, they actively try to show how conflicts can be resolved peacefully through listening, mediation, and group support. This value is woven into all aspects of their gatherings and is presented as a living example of how people can manage disagreements and tensions without resorting to force or coercion. Field testing nonviolence in an open community describes how the Rainbow family's commitment to nonviolence is tested in real and sometimes difficult situations because they welcome everyone without exception. Unlike many intentional communities that screen out disruptive or aggressive people, the Rainbow family intentionally keeps their gatherings open to anyone who arrives, including individuals struggling with violence, addiction, or other issues. They see these people not as threats but as individuals in need of support and healing, which means they often face conflicts that must be solved peacefully rather than avoided. A key example of this challenge is a place known as a camp, an area at the edge of each gathering where people who drink heavily or behave aggressively tend to cluster. A camp becomes a kind of proving ground for the group's nonviolent methods because it is where the most tension and potential conflict arise. While the behavior in a camp can drive some participants away, others argue that it is exactly what allows the group to practice its principles in real time. A camp has even helped some individuals move away from destructive habits and become active, positive members of the broader community. The philosophy behind this approach comes from anarcho-pacifist thinkers like Peter Kropotkin, who believe that harmful behavior often arises from social isolation and can be reduced through strong community support. The Rainbow family applies this belief by offering connection, acceptance, and care instead of punishment. By relying on mutual aid and emotional support, they work to show that antisocial behavior can be softened or changed when people feel included and supported rather than excluded or controlled. Shanti Sena, participatory peacekeeping, explains that the Rainbow family uses a unique form of community-based peacekeeping called Shanti Sena, which means peace center. Instead of having a fixed police force, every person at the gathering is considered a potential peacekeeper who can step in when conflict arises. There are no uniforms, ranks, or formal roles. People simply respond when they sense that a situation needs calming. This decentralized idea means peacekeeping is something everyone shares responsibility for. The Shanti Sena use simple, gentle techniques to calm tense situations. They may smile, listen carefully, or place a light, reassuring hand on someone's shoulder if appropriate. One of their well-known methods is forming an Om circle, where people stand around someone who is upset and chant Om together to create a calming atmosphere. When more discussion is needed, they form quick, informal councils where people talk through the issue and encourage cooperation through shared expectations rather than threats or punishment. These methods work largely because the entire gathering agrees on the same basic values and norms. Since everyone has a voice in shaping the community rules, people feel responsible for following them and for helping others stay on track. Peacekeepers are recognized as fellow participants, not outsiders imposing authority, which creates trust. This sense of familiarity and shared purpose gives Shanti Sena a kind of social influence that makes their gentle approaches surprisingly effective in restoring calm. At the core of Shanti Sena practice is a deep, unwavering commitment to nonviolence. They believe that responding to conflict with force only continues a harmful cycle, so they focus on compassion, patience, and communication instead. By refusing to mimic the power-based coercive styles of traditional policing, they aim to create a safer and more humane environment. Their approach is designed not just to resolve problems peacefully in the moment, but to model a completely different way of thinking about safety and community life. Conflict with traditional police. Case study of 2008 Wyoming gathering explains that government agencies often view rainbow gatherings as suspicious or threatening because they operate without leaders or formal police. To officials used to top-down control, a large, self-governing community looks unpredictable, so they send heavily armed law enforcement teams, such as the National Incident Management Team. Their presence reflects a belief that order must come from force, not cooperation, which creates tension before any conflict even begins. The most serious example of this tension occurred at the 2008 Wyoming gathering in an area called Kiddie Village, where families and children camp. The confrontation began when officers chased someone suspected of sharing marijuana into this family space. Instead of stopping the pursuit, they fired pepperball projectiles and pointed tasers at people in the area. Officers later claimed they were attacked by hundreds of rainbow participants throwing rocks and sticks, but investigations by the ACLU and video evidence showed no such behavior. Witnesses described frightened families, not an aggressive mob, and no proof supported the official story of a violent crowd. While law enforcement escalated the situation with weapons and threats, the Shanti Sena responded by forming a protective barrier between the officers and the families. They persuaded people to stay calm and helped create a path for the officers to leave so the situation would not worsen. Many were shot in the back with pepper balls as they tried to maintain peace, but they continued working to protect the vulnerable and keep emotions from spiraling out of control. Their actions focus entirely on preventing panic and shielding children from harm. The analysis suggests that the officers' behavior was shaped by fear and by training that relies almost entirely on force, leaving them unprepared to understand or work with a peaceful, cooperative crowd. They misread calm solidarity as a threat because they were accustomed to controlling situations through intimidation. The Shanti Sena, by contrast, used communication and restraint, and their nonviolent approach likely prevented deaths or severe injuries. The incident shows how two completely different models of keeping order clash, and how the nonviolent one proved more effective under pressure. Broader issues with conventional police at Tazes explains that many problems arise when traditional police interact with temporary autonomous zones like rainbow gatherings because officers are trained mainly in force-based tactics rather than communication or mediation. Their preparation focuses on controlling people through weapons, commands, and physical compliance, and internal government messages often exaggerate the dangers posed by groups like the Rainbow Family. As a result, officers arrive already on edge, expecting violence even when none is present, which increases the likelihood of overreaction. Because police are unfamiliar with nonviolent, cooperative crowd behavior, they often misinterpret what they see. When a group gathers calmly, stands together, or shows solidarity with someone being confronted, officers sometimes view this as a threatening move rather than a peaceful expression of unity. This misunderstanding leads to fear-based responses where officers escalate to force, pepper spray, tasers, or aggressive commands, simply because they do not recognize the non-violent social cues that define these communities. The section also points to a similar pattern in other peaceful gatherings, such as critical mass bike rides, where cyclists move as a group to promote bicycle-friendly streets. Police have sometimes reacted violently in these situations as well, mistaking the cyclists' unity and lack of fear for defiance or danger. This comparison shows that the problem is not unique to the Rainbow Family. It reflects a broader issue where conventional policing methods clash with nonviolent communities whose behavior does not fit the expectations of force-oriented law enforcement. Ongoing challenges for the Shanti Sena model explains that the Shanti Sena model faces challenges because it depends on staying completely spontaneous and non-hierarchical. Sometimes, volunteers begin acting too much like a traditional police force, becoming overly authoritative instead of supportive. At the same time, government officials prefer to deal with identifiable leaders or representatives, which pressures the Rainbow Family to present something that looks like a structured security team. This expectation threatens the group's commitment to a leaderless, community-driven system of peacekeeping. To counter these pressures, the Rainbow Family encourages more people to participate in Shanti Sena actions, so that peacekeeping remains widely shared rather than concentrated in a few hands. They also emphasize nurturing approaches, bringing music, food, support, and compassion to tense spaces, to keep the spirit of their conflict resolution methods rooted in connection rather than control. By involving diverse members and reinforcing their cultural practices, they try to prevent any drift toward formality or hierarchy. The section also acknowledges that nonviolence has its limits. Not every conflict can be smoothed over, especially when dealing with external authorities or unresolvable tensions. In those cases, the group relies on one of its core strategies, dissolving the temporary autonomous zone and dispersing peacefully. By ending the gathering and leaving the area, they avoid prolonged confrontation and preserve their values, reuniting later in a new place where the cycle of peaceful community building can continue. The conclusion explains that the Shanti Sena model works well because it fits naturally with the Rainbow Family's shared values of cooperation, trust, and nonviolence. Everyone at the gathering already agrees on these principles, so when people step in to calm a situation, they are acting in ways the community understands and supports. This shared mindset gives the Shanti Sena a kind of influence that does not require force or authority, making their peaceful methods effective and respected. In contrast, conventional policing does not work well in this environment because it comes from a completely different culture, one built around hierarchy, control, and the use of force. Police often arrive fearful and expecting danger, which leads them to misread peaceful group behavior as threatening. Their training prepares them to dominate situations, not communicate, so their methods often create more tension instead of reducing it. This mismatch makes traditional law enforcement poorly suited to gatherings that already maintain order through cooperation. The conclusion also notes that temporary autonomous zones like rainbow gatherings survive partly because they are mobile. They appear, function for a short time, and then dissolve before conflicts can escalate or become entrenched. This constant movement protects the community from clashes with authorities by making it impossible for long-term confrontation to take hold. Mobility, combined with a deep commitment to nonviolence, allows the gatherings to continue year after year despite outside pressure. Overall, the Rainbow Family's approach shows that it is possible for large groups to maintain peace without relying on state police or coercive power. Their example demonstrates a functioning, real-world alternative where order is created through shared values, mutual support, and collective responsibility. The conclusion suggests that while this model may not replace traditional policing everywhere, it proves that peaceful, community-based conflict resolution can work even in large, diverse crowds. The 2008 U.S. National Rainbow Gathering in Wyoming took place deep in the forest, where tens of thousands of people camped in tents and makeshift kitchens, cooking for each other and organizing life without leaders or police. One area, known as Kiddie Village, served as a family zone where parents and children gathered for meals, play, and rest. Outside the gathering's border, a heavily armed federal incident management team operated checkpoints and patrolled with a disaster response-style presence, treating the peaceful, leaderless event as a security threat simply because it functioned without formal authority. Inside the gathering, the now famous Kiddie Village incident began when federal officers chased a man suspected of sharing marijuana. Their pursuit led them directly into the children's area. According to accounts gathered later, a woman approached an officer, apparently to ask a question, and was immediately thrown to the ground and handcuffed. This sudden burst of force shocked the nearby crowd of families. The officers later claimed that roughly 400 rainbow participants surrounded them, advancing aggressively and attacking with rocks and sticks, which they said forced them to deploy tasers and pepperball weapons as they retreated through the forest. Although this was the official narrative, the officers reported no injuries despite claiming to have been pelted for nearly half a mile. A later ACLU investigation painted a completely different picture. Interviewing first-timers, professionals, local residents, and many others, and reviewing video footage, the ACLU found no evidence of any violent mob, no coordinated attack, and no barrage of rocks or sticks. At most, a single stick may have been thrown. Instead, witnesses described terrified families watching officers fire pepperball projectiles into a children's space while shouting contradictory commands. Video recordings confirmed the confusion and documented visibly frightened officers discharging irritants at people who were either standing still, trying to move aside, or stepping into the woods to avoid them. Within that chaos, the Shanti Sena, the Rainbow Family's volunteer peacekeepers, stepped in. They formed a human barrier between the armed officers and the families, soothing frightened participants and persuading younger, angrier rainbows not to fight back. They negotiated with the officers to open a path for their exit, all while some of these unarmed volunteers were repeatedly shot in the back with pepperball rounds. Later, Internal Force Service documents revealed that officers were prepared to escalate to deadly force, suggesting that the calm intervention of the Shanti Sena may have prevented serious injuries or fatalities during the confrontation. In the aftermath, the Forest Service withdrew uniformed officers from the gathering interior for 2 days, which ironically made the event safer for everyone. Internal training documents later showed that officers had been primed with exaggerated warnings about the Rainbow Family and trained extensively in violent compliance tactics but not in mediation or conflict de-escalation. Their fear, combined with a cultural misunderstanding of nonviolent collective behavior, such as kneeling in prayer or standing together in solidarity, led them to misinterpret peaceful acts as threats. The Kiddie Village incident has since become a defining example of how a militarized, fear-driven policing model can clash with, and be outperformed by, a community-led nonviolent peacekeeping approach.